So you all should have received the request now. All right, so now we are officially recording and starting. I would like to again welcome you all and emphasize the point that this discussion is a follow-up on an insightful session on women in science we had with an Indo-German perspective organized by the Alumni Association in February this year. And that is where I participated and got inspired to dig deeper into the issues of academia and gender. And before we move into the deeper side of the things, I would like to give over to Madhura Panza, who is part of the India chapter in the Alumni Association, to say a few words. What brought us till here? Madhura, over to you.
Thanks, Soumya. So as Soumya already mentioned, this is kind of a follow-up discussion to a panel discussion that took place in February. So it was organized by the Alumni Association. The Alumni Association is over 4,000, consists of around 4,000 members, and the India chapter is very new. So we started only in 2021, I think, and the panel discussion in February was our second event, and it was very successful. In fact, Anita ma'am, who was a part of the panel discussion, she was in fact the panelist whom we had called, is with us today. So she, along with three other people, so again, the format was the same. There were two Indian panelists, two panelists from Germany. Two of them were from life sciences, two of them were from social sciences, and they discussed in depth about, what are the frameworks in India versus Germany and what needs to be changed, what is good, what is not. And it was a very insightful discussion. 50, 60 women, more than that. And Soumya was one of our very enthusiastic participants, invoked a lot of discussion there. And I think that kind of led to this panel discussion where we have now new people. So Soumya, I think you can introduce the panelists now so that we can start with the discussion.
Thank you very much, Madhura. And you are really right. I definitely held on to the theme and I said, hey, Alumni Association, do you want to collaborate? And let's do this once more. But
sorry, just to interrupt you. So those of you who were not present for the previous panel discussion, we have shared the link in the chat box. You can revisit it later on if you want. Yeah, over to you, Soumya.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for that important notice. Yeah, and this discussion, however, has a focus particularly on women in science from India. So that by that we mean Indian women academics who study or have graduated from the University of Bremen, and that's why we have a mixed panel. This is also the reason why, because the Indian subcontinent, or India in particular, Indian nationality, students form one of the largest international student groups at the University of Bremen. And therefore, I thought it's important to explore the link between internationalization and gender with a focus on India particularly. As we discuss a lot of the questions that are going to come up, I also want to emphasize that we also want to look at, for the panelists, that an intersection between different factors that influence our academic journey. So starting off with, for example, not only how it impacts us as women, however, also socio-economic status, our immigration status when we are overseas, our ethnicity and our race that play a role in our entire process of the academic journey. So we'd like to focus on that as well. So I will personally not be introducing the panelists. I will let them do that for themselves. And therefore, I would request the youngest of our panelists, Tanya Kenny, to begin by giving us a short and brief introduction about herself at the University of Bremen and beyond. Tanya, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Soumya. And thank you for having me here. I am really grateful to share this space and particularly not just share my experience, but also listen to the other panelists, because I think precisely in a year or so, I'll be in a transition phase. So their stories will be very useful and helpful for me. So, hi everyone. I'm Tanya, Tanya Kaney, and I'm currently pursuing my PhD at the Bremen International Graduate School of Social Sciences, which is a joint PhD between the University of Bremen and Constructor University in Bremen Nord. I have done my master's in the University of Mumbai in India. I did it in applied psychology, and I was always interested in how culture can be influential in people's lives or values, and how it can just shape their selves in social contexts. So post my master's, I was always looking forward to moving abroad for my PhD, specifically to study culture in a more broader context. And immediately after master's, I applied to US and UK, but was not successful in securing a scholarship. So I decided to wait back in India for some years, and then shifted more to Europe and started looking for funded positions. That's when I came across this position where I am in right now. And I applied and fortunately got in. And yeah, that's how I am here. I'm here since 2021, September 2021. So it's 2 years since I'm here at the University of Bremen. And yeah, I am doing my PhD in the field of cross-cultural psychology here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Then I would like to give it to Ajita.
Thank you, Soumya, and thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, well, Tanya is right. I mean, more than contributing, we will probably get to learn as well a lot. So I am currently I'm a research associate slash lecturer slash a postdoc fellow at Constructor University, where I teach and as well as I carry out my research work. I did my PhD in BIGSSS here in Germany. I defended in December 2021. And all of my previous degrees previous qualification is from India, Allahabad University, and through it has been psychology. So yeah, it has been a nice experience, and I'm looking forward to hear from others as well.
Thank you, Ajita. Then over to Geeta.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Gitanjali. But as I have a J in my name, and Germany is not the place where you can have a J in your name and still have it pronounced correctly. And since then, we call Geeta. And that has stayed with me even here in the Netherlands. So please feel free to call me Geeta, of course, as well. Yeah, so my journey feels like a long time back. I'm talking about like completely different era. It was a completely different era. So in 2007, I came to study in the University of Bremen, do my master's there in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. And actually one of the very deciding factors in the fact that we came to this course was that we had very good word of mouth from our seniors. One of them is on the panel here as well. And it was one of the very few courses which were also in English and which were like having very good ties with our study program back in Pune, which was a Bachelor of Microbiology. So yeah, that's how I came to Bremen. And I really liked it there. I liked the program in itself, but also the topics that I got to study, so much so that I stayed back for a PhD there. And post that, my academic journey continued into the Netherlands. Since past few years, I have stepped out of academia, but I don't think I've reached anywhere close to a point where I'm like, okay, I have arrived. So I'm still on my journey, but in that sense, Bremen has been a very big cornerstone in my career in general. And that's why I'm very happy to come back and talk to you all and have a nice session.
Thank you very much for that, Geeta. Over to you, Ketki.
All right, so my journey to Bremen is very similar to Geeta's because I was her senior that she was talking about, and I had heard about this course from my seniors. My journey started in 2006. I came to University of Bremen for my master's in biochemistry and molecular biology, and just like Geeta, I stayed back at the university and I did my PhD here as well. The story is a little different though, because in 2013, after I defended my thesis, I decided to go back to India. The reason for that was I wanted to try out for myself how it is to work in my own country because I'd never done that. I was only a student in India. So I thought, let me just do that. And it was supposed to be a test case. So I joined as a postdoctoral fellow at a very prominent research institute in my hometown, Pune. But then a couple of years into my postdoc, I realized academia was not for me and I wanted to switch to industry. So I joined an organization called Accelera that does AI-based drug discovery and development. So I joined that organization as a project delivery scientist, and then switched to business development and strategy. So that's where my commercial experience with life sciences started. And after spending 5 years there, I wanted another adventure. So that's where I joined RX Propellant, which does life sciences real estate. So we know life sciences, we know real estate. We have no idea about how it works when both the worlds come together. So it was very exciting, and I'm very excited about the work that we do here because we build life sciences clusters in India in some prominent cities. So that's where we're at right now.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so much. Such a diverse group. I'm so excited. And that's why I think I shouldn't wait any longer and just jump into the real discussion, which will be a good bridge to my next question. Ketki, I'll start with you already, since you said, or at least what I could hear is that you've been quite risk-taking and adventurous with your career path. Could you perhaps give us a few highlights or lowlights of your academic journey? So I heard that you switched to industry pretty quickly after your graduation. Perhaps starting with what were the things you enjoyed when you arrived in Germany, and in comparison to India, for example, in academia, and perhaps a few factors that have left you feeling a bit uncomfortable or even felt like they held you back, if there could be some reflection on that.
Sure. So the highlight, of course, is it shaped me as a person. Those years that I spent, because like most of us who moved right after our bachelor's, we were very young, and when you're in your early 20s, you're 20, 21, your personality is also very moldable. You're very open. And I always feel like I was extremely privileged to have this opportunity to experience a different way of being so early in life, because it makes you very adaptable. It makes you very tolerant in a lot of ways as well, because all this while you're taught of doing things a certain way, and you see that no, there are other ways of doing the same thing. So it kind of shapes you as a person. And I think in general, on the softer side, that is what would be the highlight for me. On the academic side, what was the highlight was when I moved after my bachelor's, I realized that while the way we were taught, you were always good in a subject when it came to the theory part of it, but not so much when you were working in a lab. And I saw that switch. So you become more comfortable in, designing your own experiments, running your own experiments, planning your own work, and the discipline, of course, the German discipline that comes with it. So I think those skills are something that I take with me even today. Even if I'm not working in a lab today, I'm building labs for other scientists. But these are some very important qualities that I still carry with me, which I'm very grateful for. And that could only have happened if I had, gone to Germany at the age that I did at, to judge for myself what works for me.
So do I understand it correctly? There were not really any lowlights, so to say, but more of a learning experience in general.
Yeah, I would call it a challenge, but that was a real challenge, and I'm sure a lot of people here would resonate with me. It was during your dissertation, during your PhD, when you had to teach biochemistry. I had to teach biochemistry in German to diploma students. So I was conducting practicals for them, and it had to be German. So the course was German, the assessment of their work was all in German. I think that was a challenge, but the students were also very receptive to it. So they did not mind me switching to English every now and then. My PhD guide did not mind me switching to English every now and then. So looking back, it feels like it was fun, but at that point, it wasn't as much fun, I would say.
Yeah, I totally relate with that. I think the language in general, we had a short icebreaker the week before with the other panelists, and it was also one of the topics that we already discussed, that the language has been, no matter whether it was in an academic setting or otherwise, it was always a learning challenge, as you mentioned it. Yeah. Would the others want to join in and comment on Keitki's highlights and lowlights and add to your those from you? Yes, I see Geeta unmuting herself.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can, of course, relate to what Keitki said. Also, I think at the age that we moved, that is the biggest takeaway, like that you learn so much. I still remember the first day I arrived, and I think Keitki had picked me up, and I was literally, the moment I actually reached home, like home, it's sunk in that I don't have a return ticket. And that was like the first time it hit me, like, okay, you're here for good and you're here on your own, and you do not have a date when you're going back. So I think I really also grew as a person. I learned a lot about myself, how who I am also, because of course in a different society, I realized I was also different. So it probably just reflected on what was around me, and I could like absorb that. So the adaptability I also understand. Which Keitki mentioned. And for me, the lows, of course, I had an even other situation in terms of my PhD supervisor. She came from the US. So we had an American culture in a German lab with Indian people. So that was a really clash of cultures, and it was a completely other ballgame. So I did not really have to speak in German. But I can relate to the fact that, especially at the end of your PhD, you had different priorities than what was expected from you. So juggling those things together with making sure you have end date, which is not too far away than what you would like, that was definitely a challenge. But yeah, I completely relate to what she said. Yeah, kind of similar highs and lows.
Thanks for that, Geeta. Yeah, I can imagine the coming arriving. I think that it leaves an impression on oneself, and especially I don't know when you arrived. I arrived in Germany in October, and I think that's the most horrible weather to arrive in when it's gray continuously. So yes, I totally relate with few of those things as well. I would like to give Tanya a chance to perhaps give her the newest impressions of arrival and how it is, highlights and lowlights.
Thank you, Soumya. And I also resonate a lot with Geeta and Keitki that coming here and settling, though it feels great when you're leaving India, but after coming is when you really hit the realities. I think for me, one of the biggest highlights or rather, I would say this was a pull factor why I immediately took up this position, was great alignment with structured supervision. This is something I really enjoy in this PhD, because I am doing a PhD that has a structured system. So I didn't join alone. We joined as a cohort. So I did have a lot other researchers also with me, coming from different backgrounds, who are working on a common topic, although we individually have our different projects. So that for me was a huge support to understand not just the challenges of from an Indian perspective, but for somebody coming from really different backgrounds. And that also brings me to the next highlight, is the international nature of this program that I'm doing. Because I joined in a cohort, we are people with at least 8 different national backgrounds. And in the office combined, it's even more. So it's just very fulfilling to get to know people from different backgrounds. And that's when I really understood what it means to me to just be an Indian, for instance, that I never thought of back in India. So that is certainly a big highlight for me. And I think one of the most fresh low light for me is the physical paperwork here, because I know that I get all my payslips physically. And 2 times I have lost one of them. And it took me a lot of time to recover it, because I needed it for a visa to Ireland. So of course it's changing and getting more digital, but on the positive side, it has taught me to arrange all my documents, and yeah, certainly. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. The bureaucracy does teach one. In Germany, you can learn very good bureaucracy. Yes, I would like to comment more on that. However, we should allow Ajita now to introduce herself, so we can again get an interesting insight from her. Thanks,
Well,
Ajita.
Thank you, Soumya. I was just going to continue with Tanya's perspective, which is, and actually from Ketki and Geeta too, because it's just that I remember well, when you come here for the first time, it's kind of, there are certain, I mean, when you're working in a home institution somewhere where you have work, you might have colleagues you like, you don't like, but you are familiar what to expect. When you come to an international context and you have international colleagues, it's just hard to gauge that. I mean, how much work and what kind of work culture is there in the beginning, of course. Well, after that, when you adapt, and it's kind of smooth process. So yeah, you learn, change, adapt, and well, most of the points, well, Tanya covered very beautifully, so I don't have much to add, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ajita. I will then like to continue the discussion further. And Ajita, perhaps you want to be one of the first ones to comment on that. Because you also mentioned that, coming to the topic of adaptation. So looking into the challenges, some of the challenges to international women scientists, I want to pick up on a recent study from Humboldt Foundation that also grants a lot of awards and scholarships to international researchers. And they wanted an evaluation of their programs and of their networks programs. And they had a study that was called Investigation into the Potential of Internationally Mobile Researchers. And they tried to find out why there was a low participation of women in its programs, as well as receive input on how to recruit more excellent women researchers for their various awards and scholarships. India was amongst the sample of 13 countries, alongside UK, US, and South Africa as well, and others. One of the major results was that Germany was positively rated for its research conditions. However, on comparison to their own countries, in comparison, female researchers rated, so everyone, so including male researchers and others, female researchers rated career prospects for researchers, promotion of young researchers, and dual career opportunities negatively. As well as there were also factors that they mentioned, which were exclusion mechanisms and gender-specific barriers, which affected their career after the research stay. So they perceived Germany as, so to say, positively for research conditions. However, once in order to continue their career path, that was not so positively rated. So I was wondering if, since you are sort of in the middle of your career path, Ajita, if you have experienced such conditions as well, or perhaps the other panelists, I would be keen to know as well, for example, Keitki and Geeta, who are further on in their scientific careers, if you would agree or disagree with such findings. So please go ahead.
Well, with the job opportunities, I mean, yes, it's competitive. I'm not sure if only for women in science, because there is a cultural difference. I mean, this whole debate around, well, gender equality, it's still very young from Indian perspective. So even if, like, you are good with your job or you have certain career prospects in sight, it's just that there are certain relational expectations that you have there in the family. So like having a balance is something that, yeah, it's kind of difficult probably for South Asian women. Probably this is one of the things that they have to deal with a lot when they go abroad. Probably less about excelling, but more about surviving in this world of science. So this might be one of the reasons. I think there is a question in the chat.
Yes. Thanks, Ajita.
Yeah,
As I
right, yeah,
mentioned in the beginning, we would love to take the questions towards the end. I think it's from Anita Kuro. I request you for your patience so that we can keep the discussion going, and towards the question and answer round, we will get back to your questions. Madhura, could you please make a note of that question so you address it as soon as we reach there? Thank you.
Sure, Soumya.
All right. Thanks, Ajita, for your input. Would one of the other panelists like to address that? Keitki? Yeah.
So, one thing that was very peculiar when I moved to Germany was that I came along with a bunch of people who had similar backgrounds, who went to the same college, who thought alike. And we thought that was the only way of being, that, you get an opportunity to move to a different country, your family is behind you 100%, and you go there. But once I actually came to Germany, I realized there were a lot of Indian women who were not in my course, but they were doing other courses. They were here because either their husbands were in Germany and then they were trying to, make the most of that time. There was this one lady that I still remember. She came from the southern part of India. And she was pursuing her PhD in Germany. She had a child who she left back in India because she couldn't figure out how she could take care of her child and have a full-time PhD position going on. The reason for that is also, especially when you're a parent, the Indian system of upbringing is where you have your grandparents, you have all the help that you want. It's just, it's ingrained in us. As against that, in Germany, you can be, I have seen instances where the mothers are much more independent. They don't necessarily look for that support because they get it, from systems like creches or what have you. I think that dependence on family inherently becomes a challenge at some point of time for women, either when they get married or when they have children, which could be a reason why you see the numbers dwindle as the number of research years in your career increase.
That's interesting what you say, Ketki, with the childcare opportunities. In fact, the study also pointed out that in comparison to dual career opportunities, the women in the sample group, so they were not specifically from India, they also rated having more opportunities for dual careers as compared to opportunities available for childcare. So I guess there was a dynamic in it. Could also be because it's a recent study that there is more potential that women travel internationally themselves, and therefore they would like to take their partner with them. Again, it brings the question of how is partnership defined? So do you have to be married by law or not, etc. So those were the factors that also the study pointed out. So it's interesting that you also noticed that in your own experience as well. Geeta, I remember we had a short discussion or chat about the dual career opportunities. Did you have to face that during your time at Uni Bremen as well, or is it only later on in your career stage?
Yeah, so at Uni Bremen, I did not have to care for a partner then, in that sense that, okay, I was studying and even my PhD was a very standalone exercise. But of course, after that, after my marriage, when I moved out of Germany, I think anywhere in Europe at that point in time was a similar situation. I think the opportunity for a dual career seems easy on paper, but still hard in reality, because either of the partner has to then look at something that's close by, because practically it's impossible to have really the best of the labs in different countries, which is why me and my partner also did our PhDs in different countries to prioritize at that point in time the field of research, because either of us did not want to compromise on that. And which was a good decision for us. It worked out well, but I mean, it's not for everybody. And that I know that I come from a place of privilege there. But yeah, I definitely, and childcare, I feel Germany is better than where I am right now, which is Netherlands. Netherlands is still in that era of trying to figure out and catching up with the gender equality, but Germany is much better. And I actually saw people taking maternity time out, parental time out so much more easily. Like the German people, they did not have any guilt to take that time out of their work, and which is how it should be. But I think most of us who were abroad, we bought time working, there, did not want it to kind of also then take a big chunk of time out for child rearing or something like that. And I had that also here in the Netherlands. I did not. Here, the parental day is very common, like 4 days a week is very common. Every person with a child does that, even the men. But me and my partner did not do that, because that would mean a longer time of stay, and whose contract can be extended easily by 3 months, not in academia. So indeed, it sounds easy. It feels like, hey guys, we're giving you so many things. You ask for this, we give you that, but it's not tied together, Dual career is already a step forward, but it's practically not. Still, if you are both ambitious in academia, it's not as simple as it sounds.
That's quite right, I would say, because if we look at, as I mentioned in the beginning, in intersectionality of this perspective, it's dual career and having equal opportunities is on one side. However, we have to consider when we are talking about international mobility, it also comes with border restrictions, which means, again, Geeta, in our discussion earlier, we also discussed how visas are limited and how visa is tied to your work contract or to your PhD contract. Tanya, I see you nodding your head. Would you like to contribute to that?
No, but I just agree with you right now, because I am more at an early stage, at a really early stage. And at this point, challenges for me are more immigration related, more than gender. And then through the discussion, I do see at what point maybe in the future where gender steps in, because at this point for me, for instance, it's a very high time pressure precisely due to visas and deciding to go back or stay here. So it was just an agreement that at an early phase where for instance, I come from social science background, and in my cohort itself, we have a lot more women than men. And maybe at a later position, this kind of might be reversing. But I do see that at this point, we have a lot of, especially in the project that I am in, we have a lot of similarity or equality in terms of our funding for even my male colleagues and me. And so at this point, the challenges I face are quite more immigration related or visa related. And that was just an agreement to what you just said.
Yes, exactly. And also, I have done my PhD in fact, in migration of women who've migrated to Germany for reasons of family and visa, for example, and the country they come from. So the origin of themselves is a critical factor, because the regulations are not equal for all countries in this world. And therefore, considering that India is also not highly rated in terms of how many countries we must apply a visa for, which restricts our opportunities, of course, further. Ajita, if you have anything to add, otherwise we would like to proceed to the next part.
No, I just had a visa appointment this morning, but honestly, I have nothing to add to this. So
I hope that went well for you, Ajita.
yeah, well, it was interesting. We can talk about it later, but it worked out. So yeah.
Yes, I do remember you mentioning as well that you have to provide a language certificate on top of the 40 hours a week that you are expected to work.
Yeah, it appears it was not required, and there was some confusion. But they are extending it according to the contract. But yeah, I mean, adding to, I think, well, the previous point, it's just that academia itself, it's a bit unstructured. So like the work we do, it's hard to be bound by the, like visa rules are strict. Like you have a definite time according to the contract, and the contract time is fixed. So it's not a 9 to 5 thing in academia. Like you cannot leave the work in the office. So sometimes you have class on Monday, you have to prepare on weekends. Sometimes you work on your time off. So it's it becomes difficult to put it in like that structure. And as Tanya said, it becomes a bit of immigration pressure. So yeah, that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I would like to proceed into another setting.
Sorry, Soumya.
Yes,
can
sorry.
I interject?
Yes, go ahead.
While we are on this immigration issue, and of course here I will talk about immigration not in terms of gender, but as an Indian, because it's important discussion to have. Back in 2006, I don't know if the rules have changed now, but back in 2006, when we had to apply for student visa to move to Germany, we take all the documents saying the university has admitted us to a particular course. And along with the documents, we had to deposit 7,200 euros in the bank before we even migrated. This was like a deposit money for the government to ensure that you have enough resources in the bank to sustain. Now that amount in Indian rupees can be a lot. And it was not just that amount. If you've taken a loan, you had to show documents for a loan that you've taken, a student loan. If not, you had to show, all the assets that your family owns, because clearly you're not going to have an asset at the age of 20 or 21. And I think that can be very prohibitive for good students who cannot put in that kind of money. Now, 2 years later, when I came back to India, I had taken a short break after my master's, and I applied for my visa for a PhD back at the same university. Because I was doing my PhD, my visa was processed in 24 hours. And they gave me back the money that I had to give for visa processing. The visa processing fee was actually given back into my account, saying you're going there on a scholar visa now. We don't need you to pay even a single euro just to get your visa. And I just feel this can be so prohibitive, because there would be some really good students who want to go to Germany, after their bachelor's, and they may not be able to because of certain regulations. Now, like I said, this was way back in 2006, and then my PhD visa in 2008. So I don't know if things have changed, but I could see that stark difference when it just came to immigration rules for a master's student versus a PhD student, which I don't really understand.
I would also comment that it's exactly, I cannot answer whether it's the same right now. Perhaps Tanya has an input on that. But it has been similarly prohibiting or discriminatory, I would say, to be brave enough, about family visas as well. There are particular countries which have it, so to say, easier. I would be very curious whether you had that experience or had any exchanges, Keitki, at your time to discuss with other international students coming from other countries, whether they had to provide the similar kind of financial backing compared to Indian students, for example. So for example, for family visa, I can say that those traveling from the US or the UK do not have to provide what we call the language certificate before migrating as a spouse, whereas I, coming from India, did, or on Indian passport. So there are differences there made depending on, of course, the country of origin. Tanya, would you know if there is a deposit still expected of international students?
Yes, there is still a deposit expected, and I think the number is a little higher now compared to that. But I think for PhD, when I came, I did not have to pay this deposit, but not because for PhD, it was because the PhD was funded. So if you have a PhD now, but it's not funded, then you're still expected to, I think, have a deposit. But yeah, there's still a deposit. Yeah. But the good part is in Bremen, you don't have to show a lot of money when you have to renew the visa, as opposed to, I know, in some other states in Germany. So that's a good thing.
All right. Thank you for that information. If the other panelists do not have anything else to add, I would like to move on. All right. So now I would like to perhaps explore more of the interaction of gender and educational backgrounds. And I heard the word privilege a couple of times from the panelists. And I would like to just provide you a few numbers and a few background information on why I chose this. According to the university numbers report, so for the 2022, as I mentioned in the beginning, Indian student body is quite large. And according to this report, there were 370 students with Indian nationality registered as of 2022 at the University of Bremen. So that includes bachelor's, master's, and those who are regularly registered as a PhD students. And out of this 370, about 242, which is about 65% of them were men or declared themselves as men. And only around 34% or 128 out of the 370 were women. This statistics was quite interesting to me and a very obvious one in a way seen socially. Before we go into you answering the questions, I was quite surprised to see a similar number in another paper by Guevara Ramirez et al. From 2022, where they discuss 10 simple rules for empowering women in science or in STEM. And they said that gender differences in STEM participation, so that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, are visible from childhood and continue throughout academic life. For example, women represented only 35% of students enrolled in STEM disciplines in higher education in 2017, and this was in another country. Which was quite similar to what we had at University of Bremen for amongst the Indian student body. And they also pointed out that women's underrepresentation in STEM education could result from an interaction of social, cultural, psychological, and learning process barriers. Moreover, this study suggested that families and teachers tend to encourage more mathematics, science, and technology learning in boys than in girls through play opportunities, games, or toys during childhood. So I was wondering if there's a connection between international mobility of women from India to Germany, for example, and this could be a more intersectional gender question as to why there are such less women studying at the University of Bremen from India. So now I'll give it up to the panel to perhaps reflect a bit on that and perhaps in your experience provide some reasons that could have been for international mobility. As I also heard from Ketki and Geeta talking about having this privilege to be overseas or to have this experience at a younger age is what led to that privilege. So over to you.
Yeah, maybe I could start on that. And I really want to emphasize on the word privilege, and coming back to just exactly what Ketki said in the last discussion, is that we were a special sort of group of people coming from a similar college from the same college in the city, right? So we actually were more or less from the same sort of a little bit here, a little bit there, same economic bracket. So if you would have asked me directly an impact of, let's say, the gender or whatever, I think we have, at least in life sciences in Bremen at that point in time, we did not see that obviously we were enough number of Indian girls as well as boys in that cohort coming to study molecular biology, biochemistry. I think those topics are also softer in the STEM domain and probably less of technology in it. I do not know, but I personally would have not seen that in the education in our course. Again, that is privilege because we really had not too many people coming from smaller towns or outside of our, even the bachelor's course at that point in time. And that's where I think that maybe my experiences are not very representative of even the struggles. And even if I bring the point forward, maybe there are 10 other points that 10 other women who came from not as comfortable situation as we would have had to face. Like even this amount is for some people unsurmountable, even if whatever talent there is. In the same way, that's the major privilege that I was mentioning, that I think I struggled, but probably there are people who came with lesser things on their side. I know. And these numbers actually 60-30, they are kind of, in any case, I think they flow through the throughout the career path even further along. But I feel at the top, it's even much worse. So if I'm right now, I'm seeing like even if I'm now looking for senior roles, that's the harder thing to crack. And still a matter of perspective. And it's not only the Indian perspective. I see the same sort of patriarchy also in the Netherlands. So I wouldn't necessarily pin it on our society, but it's a universal gender kind of a discussion. And in India, that's so ingrained that it's society accepted. Even we accept it quite like easily. Like, of course, I mean, yeah, I can understand. I'm a woman, but it's more, let's say, deeper seated because of our like social values, our cultural, moral, ethical values, but it is prevalent also in cultures which are Western. I see it in the Dutch culture, in the German culture as well. So these actually 60-30, yeah, I mean, and if you would break it down according to subject, I think technology still could be. I am a mom of 2 boys, so at least I take it upon me to not perpetuate that and percolate that further. So I think that's a good starting point. Yeah, I do see that though, that it happens even in his peers here, even he goes for Dutch school. I see that some families still have that stereotypical kind of outlook to what is inclination for the boy versus the girl. So it does start early. It does start early, and it does influence the choices you make further along. But I do not think there is a one-step solution to it. It has to start from ourselves, I guess. I don't know.
I'll just add to what Geeta was saying, and I really resonate with her, and that's exactly the privilege that I was talking about. Up until I was 21, I thought the whole world thinks like we do, you know. And the moment I moved to Germany, I realized I was actually living in a cocoon, and it was a very cushy, a very buffered place where gender equality was a given. Your brother did not get any differential treatment than you. Your cousins, depending on their gender, did not get any treatment that was different. And then you realize it's actually it was during my bachelor's that I realized that there's also another way of being. So I remember there was this a very dear friend of mine. She was brilliant in science, but she was told that I give you, and after your bachelor's, you have 2 years, and then we are going to get you married. So you do what you have to do in those 2 years. And unfortunately, what happens is career in life sciences, especially in academia, it's a very long journey. So by the time you're at the end of the tunnel with your PhD, you're hitting 30. In an Indian context, if you're 30, it's time to have children. And God forbid you're not married, then you're doomed. Your life is going to end. That's a more, and that's a general perspective on things, you know. I'm not saying that there are no outliers. I feel very fortunate that my family and my extended family did not think that way, but we were maybe 5% minority in the grander scheme of things. So I can also imagine for a situation where a woman at 21 knows that they only have 2 years before they're going to get married. What kind of convincing do you have to do to tell your parents that I want to spend these 2 years abroad? They're going to say, why? What do you want to do that for? You're eventually we're going to get you married off and you're going to have kids and you're going to be comfortable. And I think that is also a reason why when it comes to immigration, you see those skewed numbers. And even if irrespective of where you are in science, one thing I've realized, and I see that for myself, as you climb up the ladder, your commitment towards your work just increases exponentially. The time that you give to your work just increases, whether you want it or not. It doesn't matter if you're on contract for a 40-hour-a-week job, you're going to land up doing much more than that. You're going to carry your work home even mentally. You know, physically, you may not be carrying your work home, but mentally, you're carrying your work home. And especially, now I don't have any children, but I can only imagine for women who have children to be able to juggle between these two very different lives is going to get difficult at some point of time. And that's why as you go up, you see those numbers also dwindle. Because even today, when we are talking about gender equality, a lot of it is still lip service. Because in the boardroom, a woman is not treated differently because she's a woman. The ruthlessness of a business does not change depending on whether you're a man or a woman. And that's unfortunately the truth of life. So unless we make some very systemic changes to this, which will take you decades, even more, you never know. You have to change the mindset first. And then you see a change. I think it's going to take a while. It's very unfortunate, but that's unfortunately the case.
Tanya, you were putting your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add to what Ketki just said about academia being a really long journey, because I will share an incident. So for after my master's, I applied to US and UK, and I was not successful in securing a scholarship. And so I also received some rejections that time because I was just really fresh out of master's with not so much experience. But what some of the universities did suggest to me was that I could repeat the master's there and then carry forward with PhD. Now, at this point, I know of not a lot, but I do know some female friends who declined such an offer and then chose not to continue PhD, not to continue masters again, repeat the masters, and rather stay and not pursue so much into academia and rather change. And I do know some male friends who went and repeated the masters and then continued. Even for me, I also chose not to repeat the masters, rather stay home, work, and then I preferred waiting for the 3 years to get into PhD directly than repeating. So it's already long, and in such cases that could also sometimes limit international mobility, which has got to do with maybe recognizing some degrees, and also, yeah, it's just there I could really see how gender can, to an extent, influence your decisions of going abroad. Yeah.
Yeah, that thank you very much, Tanya. And that matches quite a lot with also Ketki also touched upon in terms of systemic changes. And I think I strongly do believe that a lot of the systemic changes are also related with social changes, again, speaking of intersectionality and intersections. That's why I wanted to read that study out in terms of encouragement of boys to, build things and to, be an engineer already when they are 2, whereas girls are always given a pink Barbie, etc. Does not mean that Barbie cannot be emancipated. But looking back at my own academic history, I also think I was privileged to have my way through, and I remained in social sciences. And my father tried very hard, a natural scientist himself, to convince me to do a master's, a BSc. And I told him at that point, what is your end result? Do you want me to get like above 90% in my 12th grade? Is that what you want? And he said, yes, of course I want you to do well. I said, I will get you that. Let me do social sciences. And I did. So I think it is sort of, in a way, it makes me also think whether if he had a boy, if it would have been natural for him to say, of course, he's my boy and he's going to follow my footsteps, so to say. And it would not have been harder for him to convince or for me to convince. So I sort of do think that social changes or the systemic change is starting already at our family lives. For example, I also have 2 boys, Gita, and I similarly try very hard to do my bit and to not fall into gender stereotypical roles or models for them. But of course, the system is very different. And Ketki, you mentioned like the boardroom looks very different. But I wonder the question again, whether the boardroom would look different if there were 50 men and 50 women. Or does it look very different when there are 2 women and 5 men sitting in that boardroom making decisions? So those are the questions that I sort of think in terms of, I think, coming back from the February panel discussion, where at the end I also posed the question of whether we are trying to fix the women or should we be fixing the system? And I think that remains still a question. And that's why I would like to have perhaps an input from you all to also towards the closure, also that we can give the audience a chance to ask questions. to examine the existing supporting systems, especially in academia. I know for a few of you, it has been a long time, but if you can perhaps reflect back, and for Tanya and Ajita, who are currently still here, to think of existing systems and structures that are in place, which perhaps you know of or you don't. For example, my office, Equal Opportunities Office, if you were aware of that or not. What would be some systemic changes that you could dream of if you dare to, and expect changes to happen faster than they are, or not in decades, but perhaps from the grassroots now. So I leave the floor open to you all.
Well, I mean, it's I can't complain much because honestly, I had a lot of institutional support from supervisors, from colleagues. It's just that, yeah, well, from, let's say, government authorities, the expectations, I mean, for example, like learning a language with a full-time contract, it's a bit hard. And plus, I think I already mentioned with the visa policy, so it's kind of bound to the contract. So it's kind of pretty tight. So after a PhD, let's say you have papers to publish and you have to prepare a new proposal, which is like the next steps after a PhD in academia. It's kind of this is something that you have to do on your own time, not during the contract hours. So as I said, like academia is a bit unstructured, and plus putting it together with the visa and like immigration regulations, it becomes a bit difficult. So if there was a bit of flexibility there, that would be nice. Yeah, that's my input in in short time.
Thank you very much, Ajita. Tanya, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with Ajita totally. And something to add is, I do know in Uni Bremen, for instance, there is Bremen Early Career Researcher Development Center, where they do host a lot of workshops or just programs for different aspects, not just on gender and opportunities for women or males or just early career researchers in general. They also have a lot of other workshops, and that is something I have attended 3 of these, and that's something I really, that's a really nice initiative. And it's nice to see that they also have, for instance, I know of the Equal Opportunity Office in Uni Bremen. At the same time, there's also this Equal Opportunity Office at the office that I'm working in, and so I do see that they are representing a lot of diversity, not just gender-wise, but also nationality and ethnicity-wise in selection committees for PhD. What I really, at this point, for instance, coming from this phase where I will be in a transition very soon, what I really want or am looking for right now is this mentoring, or rather looking for women in leadership roles or roles where I could get inspiration from. And that's something I feel is, because every time I attend a workshop, I do see asking the same questions to every woman, that how was your journey, or what did you do, and how did you reach here? So these stories, or these, this is something that personally would be very inspiring and also very motivating to get to know these women, or get to know their journey, for instance, or problems that they had, or how did they reach at the position. And if they are from an international background, that would be even something that would be helpful for me personally. And this mentoring or this inspiration is what might be really helpful. Yeah.
Tanya, our office does offer a mentoring program. I will send you personally some information on that, but this is a very good aspect for my own project as well. As some of you already know, I am developing this project particularly for international scientists and women scientists at University of Bremen. And I do think that in terms of having inspirational and support from women in science with a similar background, and by that I also mean socio-economic or ethnicity or nationality background, I think helps a lot. It helps you open up. I can already see in this session itself that there was, for example, with me in the panelists, there was already kind of vibe, and I think it does help you jump the first hoop already. Thank you for that input. Geeta and Keitki, would you like to comment on that as well? I understand your academic positioning has been a long time ago.
I actually wouldn't have much to comment on this, but on the topic of inclusivity. And I want to share one example. I know I'm going to digress a bit from this discussion, but I think it's important to share this. So like I said, after my stint in Germany, I moved back to India. And at the juncture where I was thinking about transitioning to industry, I was open. I said, okay, let me try everywhere. Let me even try Germany. And at that point, and I'm talking about 2014. So I was applying, and a very large pharma company in Germany invited me to come for an interview, which was a 3-day long interview with different people. They flew me in, they had taken care of my accommodation. And I had a good feeling about this interview. But on the last day, when I was just leaving, this person who would have been my boss if I was chosen for this job tells me, hey, thank you for coming, but we had already chosen an internal candidate. At that point, I was so disappointed because I thought for someone who's got 2 degrees from Germany, it should be easy to come back. It's not like you're coming with a foreign degree. And they must have seen some merit for them to spend that kind of money, even to fly someone in and then spend 3 days with different teams. And I think that experience itself was what made me decide to stay back in India. I said, I'm not looking elsewhere. I'm just going to look at India. And at that point, I couldn't help but think, if I was that one statistic for diversity when it comes to hiring, so that you're showing that for this position, I have scanned candidates from across the globe, men, women, but then I've chosen an internal candidate. I know I digressed from your question, but I wanted to bring that up because this is very relevant, especially in corporate. I still feel academia is much more inclusive in their policies because academia also gives you a bit of flexibility, which industry does not. Because industry is, if it's a 9-to-5 job, it's a 9-to-5 job. Then they don't care if you have children, if you don't have children, if you have some other obligations. So I think in industry, they look at you from a slightly different lens when they are looking at you as a serious employee.
Thank you for that, Keitki. I have recently attended a talk for a person who was working in the area of diversity, quite a good presenter and keynote speaker. And this was exactly the question I posed to them. And in academia, you will be surprised that it is not different. So in academia, international women, for example, would end up making perhaps 1% of the top leadership positions, by which I mean professorship and further. So there is a different lens when it comes to inclusivity. Definitely academia also has a lot to work on. And of course, I think diversity and inclusivity are becoming more of buzzwords. But as you mentioned also in your earlier talk, that it does not need to be only lip service. So which means if we do have equal opportunities office, that I myself included, make an attempt to make diverse programs for a diverse audience and to make sure that for me personally, it's important to have more grassroots level changes and structures in place, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have this discussion, because I think it is so important to first listen to the experiences, as you have pointed out as well. And that's why I take away from there as to what changes are required, like as Tanya mentioned, in terms of inspiration and mentoring, which is perhaps one of the key points, as well as inclusivity, and to actually question what does inclusion mean, and who do we include, and or do we have, as you said, I am one of part of the statistics of, oh yes, of course I had a diverse panel, or of course I had diverse interviewees, but what came out of the end is another question. So thank you for that. And for example, in our office, we also have a program called Go Diverse, where exactly senior researchers and those in leadership positions provided training, diversity training, in order to address a diverse audience. Not only that, but also in the recruitment procedures to look into the topic of diversity and inclusivity. So there is hope, but of course, it all is a long process and takes a long time for changes to come about. I thank you all for your lovely input. And as I see, we are exactly on the 15-minute mark for open floor questions and answers. I thank all the panelists for this very interesting and discussive session. And I now would like to request the audience to please, thank you, Nilu, to post your questions via chat, or just use the raise hand function in Zoom for your questions. And Madhura, yeah, you're taking over the question and answer. I was just about to say thank you, Madhura.
No, that's fine. I think we already have a couple of questions in the chat box. So the first one was from Anita Kurup ma'am. I think this is a general question to everyone as to what were the gender specific highs and challenges in the international settings. I am not sure if they covered it in their journeys. Any gender specific highs or challenges?
I mean, as already Tanya has mentioned, I mean, social sciences is more a female-dominated discipline, either in India. So it's hard to say if there was any gender-specific high or low, because then the chances of discrimination or like a woman-specific achievement, like it lowers down. The chances of a gender-specific event lower down because it's a women-majority discipline. So, but of course, in natural sciences, I think it's a bit more competitive. So, in case Lisa or Casey would like to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I could add on that. I feel that actually in Uni Bremen, in our program at least, I think we had quite some nice female professors. So actually, that's a high in the sense that we really, it was a mixed panel. Of course, there were also very distinguished men, like who were in the university longer probably than the women. But we had, like in that situation as well, quite a good balance of also. But I feel that personally that the low is in the sense that even I feel like now here when I like apply for things here in Netherlands, that the step forward in the European context has come towards equality between men and women. The next step is probably women of color. So I still feel that even in opportunities for women, I am always out of European descent.
Sorry, Geeta, we didn't get your last few sentences. Could you come closer to the mic? And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm trying to say that here I think the steps forward have been more towards as men and women. So women have had enough, let's say not enough, not nearly enough, steps towards inclusion. But it is still to come to women of color. So I still feel that if there are opportunities, I am not the first person to get it. It will be a Dutch woman. So there are probably grants or there are probably initiatives, I mean, in academia grants, but in general for positions, if they need to fill it with women, there will be more European women that fit the bill better or in that context, tick that box than women of color. So I feel for myself, the turn is still to come with one more step in advance where, okay, first this sort of awareness is in place. And I am a diversity and inclusion ambassador at Philips because this was the first time outside of academia where I could get a chance to work on such things. Because again, academia kind of does not give you enough time to do things that are like probably an afterthought. But this time I did get a chance, and I think the first step is beginning these discussions, because you could be amazed how little somebody who has not seen such a landscape or such diversity, how little they grasp, because just out of sheer lack of exposure of these concerns, these topics, what expats face, or like in what is inclusion, even when you're not being inclusive. Also, that's a very important thing to just bring up. So yeah, I feel like having these discussions is a good step forward, and structurally having them often enough is also very important.
So I'll just add to what Geeta was saying, and women of color, I think that's a very important aspect. See, in a place like India, where obviously, everyone looks alike. So, I mean, when it comes to the color of their skin, you're not going to face as much discrimination. But if you look at the European countries or in US, you can obviously see that there is, different people who come from different places. And a lot of times the question to be asked is that, yes, their ethnicity by design might be something else, but how integrated are they in this environment? Because finally, that is important. How they appear is so secondary to how they would adapt to a given work environment in academics or even in industry. I think that's one thing that is so overlooked, and we need to make a change in that direction. In fact, especially in the US, there is this concept called a diversity hire, which doesn't have a positive connotation to it, unfortunately, because it's actually saying that there was a seat that was allocated for someone who didn't fit the bill, whatever boxes had to be checked, they don't check all those boxes, and hence they get in. But then what you're downplaying there is actually the merit that the person gets in. So I think we have really got a long way to go, where we assess people on their sheer capabilities, we assess people on their sheer ability to work in the team that they're asked to work with, rather than how they look or where they come from. All these things are very secondary.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's why in my project, for example, I focus really on the women of color aspect, because there is such little visibility of women in science of different color, and to be there. And also in terms of, I'm not sure if you heard the Matilda effect. It was coined by science historian Margaret Rosita in 1993, which says basically women's work is not recognized. And I would say for perhaps women from the global south is probably 2 times so, as Geeta said. There is a tendency of men hiring men. And when it comes in an international context, then I want to hire someone who looks and talks like me rather than someone who doesn't. So perhaps that is a long way to go as well for women of color. Madhura, back to you. Sorry, I digressed for your question and answer round.
No, it was not a digression. Actually, that was a very nice take to Anita ma'am's next question itself, that was about what is the definition of diversity? Like, what does it take to be true to diversity? And, it needs to move beyond tokenism and appearance. And I think Ketki's insights actually provided that. So I will be skipping this question. But there was one question before to Ajita, I think, when she was talking about the dual career opportunities. So the question is, how did you address it? And yeah, I think that it was, but Anita ma'am, if you can, maybe you can unmute yourself and maybe elaborate a bit on that question if you want.
The question of diversity that I was talking about?
No, this one about, this was asked way before in the first part of the discussion. You had posted about how did you address it. So I'm assuming that was during the time that Ajita was talking about the dual career opportunities or something similar.
Yeah. Because I think that, see, one of the things that we are struggling with is women do address the challenges of dual career and child care, but I think they stay as very individual experiences, and it just moves perhaps to something that we would call as best practices. I actually urge for a much more deeper analysis of the best practices, so there is some learning that can be derived out from that. And I think that's something that I have been pushing within the diversity angle, because I think every time you talk about it, people say, yes, we are doing this and we are doing that. We are trying to juggle careers. We are giving provisions at the institutions. And if women say that that's not enough, I think it's very important that we do a much more deeper analysis of it to understand how do provisions provided at institutions are leveraged, or why it can't be leveraged. Why is the block there from the personal angle? Because I think that conversation must be opened. Only then your systematic interventions would make sense to a large number of women. And just on the diversity point, I just wanted to say, I think it may be useful for us to look at outcomes rather than looking at provisions. And I think that shift is very useful, because if we are not able to correct the numbers, both in terms of women of color, in terms of representation, ethnicity, culture, nationality, then you have not got there. You cannot console yourself and say, no, I've opened it and they have come up to the last round of interview. So that's not where you stop. And I just thought that one needs to sort of push it further than that. Thank you. It was a very interesting set of conversations. I really learned quite a bit out of this panel discussion.
Okay, I think then there was a comment by Priya from the attendees. She said that the idea of family and childcare is important when we discuss about women in science. Would you like to comment more on that?
Yeah, definitely. I would. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. First of all, it has been a really nice discussion, and I listened to all of it, and I really enjoyed it. My point was actually regarding the question when we were discussing the opportunities for women in India or in Germany and the equal opportunity and stuff. So I was really, I wanted to share my experience that, so I started my PhD in 2017 at BIGSSS at University of Bremen. And then I had a child, so I chose to go back to India and come back again. But then when I come back here, I had all these issues of first trying to find a daycare, get back to work, because otherwise it's a different environment. When we are in Germany, we don't have our family to support us in childcare. And then, so we always think like, oh, the childcare opportunities in Germany are so great. Why not just try there? But when you come here and you realize that actually it's really bad, that it took me 8 months to get a place. And even though now I'm considered lucky at my institute, because people are like, oh, how did you find a place? Because there are 1,300 children mothers still trying to find a place in Bremen. So that's a problem for women in academia who have a family or a child to continue their work. And then I was wondering, how am I going to compensate when I would start looking, because I'm trying to finish my thesis, well, hopefully soon. So when I would be looking for a job, I don't know how I'm going to compensate for the time and how I'm going to explain that why it took me 2 years of parental leave instead of 1 year. I'm not going to explain them because I was not finding a childcare place. So I had like limited hours of work on my thesis. And then also I would like to really bring this point here, because this is definitely a very great platform. We always talk about difference. Oh, if a German woman in Germany giving birth and then trying to do things, the fact that we are international, or I can talk about myself. So the fact that I am coming from an international country, let's say like from India to Germany, I am not aware of so many rules, how things work with it. So when I try to deal with so many bureaucratic structures, maybe I'm not aware. And when I try to understand, and then the language differences there, that understanding the system is so difficult. I had issues with migration, then I had issues with childcare, and then plus I also have issues in terms of okay, now you are not getting any fellowship. How are you going to manage a family and then work here, then finding a health insurance on all these things? So my point is that how much is the system inclusive of women who have a child while doing a PhD or while not having a permanent work contract? You know what I mean? Because also as a postdoc, if we have like 3 years of postdoc and we feel like, okay, we have now our PhD and we are in a stage of our career where we can think about family planning. But then we feel like also postdoc is like a temporary work. And then again, you break your career. So when is the right time for us in academia? When can we exactly feel like the system is supporting us, the bureaucracy is supporting us, and that we can actually look at our career, meanwhile also taking care of our family? I don't know. I just feel like it's just in my head, and that just needs attention from all of us, because at some point we'll all be there. So yeah, good luck. But yeah, thanks for the discussion. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to add that, yeah, that this question of when is the right time, I feel like career-wise, there is never one answer to it, because I mean, there are success stories of people who managed it well, and there are like, then again, there are these instances, these become individual stories, like some people managed it and some people didn't. So academia will never tell you, I guess. It really has to be coming from your personal side. And I think it is, I had my kids in here when I was doing my postdoc, and I even had difficult post-pregnancy situations, but that, yeah, it was not easy, and it kind of would add more years to my work. And I can sometimes when I look back, I feel of how did I manage that? You know, like now they are old enough to, you know, just be not a big road, like not a big thing to arrange anymore. But yeah, I feel like there is not enough done. And if at my work, I was still there in academia. At my work, I think there was some sort of definite human support, like in that sense that people could understand that I have kids and etc. But I think I was the hardest on myself. So I feel like we also have to start from ourselves again there, that we are not super women and there will be some things that you could do better here or there. And that's okay. Don't have to be perfect, you know. So I think it's a matter of also being kind to yourself, I feel. And if I were you, I would say that actually I managed to do this alongside 10 other things, and that tells you how I can multitask. I always would encourage you to not look at it as something that you do not need to mention. I mean, I think it should come with as a positive thing, and of course it's personally up to you how you answer that question. But I always feel that actually it's a merit to have juggled too many things rather than something that's negative, you know. So yeah, and I still get asked. Actually, on my CV, I barely have like a year's gap or something, and I still get asked the question as to if I'm in interview rounds as to whether my family will allow me to work. So forget about what's on your CV. You will get that question. I do not have a single gap, even with my all whatever pregnancies, everything. All contracts look very normal, and I am still asked that because of how I look like and what they expect in a stereotypical situation. If my job is including travel, they will ask whether your family is comfortable with that. I do not know how many male candidates are asked that. So yeah, I feel like, but I feel more and more companies are trying to invest in making sure that at least at hiring, people do not make these like major errors of asking people about their personal situations and stuff like that. But I think recruiters find a way to still ask you that. So yeah, we try to make it forward, I guess, and start from your not being too hard, I feel.
Okay. Thanks, Geeta, for sharing your experience. And I don't think we have any more questions. And I think 90 minutes got over really fast. So unfortunately, again, as it happened in the last panel discussion, we have to wrap up before. I think a lot of people still have a lot of thoughts, but we'll take it with us. And hopefully we'll have another follow-up after this. I don't know, Soumya. So before I hand it over to Soumya for the conclusion part, I would like to thank Soumya again on behalf of the Alumni Association India chapter for really initiating this. And I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing such wonderful insights. I also have been a student of University of Bremen. It's been long, but it took me back to my own days, especially Geeta's and Ketki's. I am seeing you after a long time, and thank you first of all for really agreeing to come and join in here. It has been wonderful. And yeah, now Soumya, over to you for the conclusion.
Thank you so much, Madhura. That was going to be my point as well. Thank you again for the panelists for these really insightful inputs. I've made a lot of notes towards the end. I was just writing notes and have things like outcomes more than provisions. And I have a bureaucracy / how do we understand the system? And I have inclusivity, I have women of color, I have mentoring and inspiration. And I think those are really the key words out of this panel discussion. And I thank all the 4 panelists with the deepest of my heart for their contribution and their time, especially. And with that, I would like to close this panel discussion. I noticed there was a very late entry. I hope the person is still around, but in case they have missed, which they have, most of the discussion will be available on YouTube via the Alumni Association's links. And I would like to thank nevertheless, the Alumni Association, especially the India chapter, for actively supporting this discussion and helping me to take it to this stage. Thank you very much, both Madhura and Christoph. And thank you for the audience for being very active and contributing. And the conversation on diversity and promoting women in science must go on. As Anita also very rightly said, these discussions need to be heard, and there needs to be outcomes towards these discussions in terms of measurement. And I think that's how I want to end this discussion. Thank you very, very much. Have a lovely evening or night, wherever, or afternoon, wherever you are. And Madhura, could you let me know if you know from the last time when the link would be available for YouTube?
I think that would be for Christoph to answer. Probably you can maybe just write in the chat box, Christoph, because the Alumni Association, that account handles that. So I'm not really sure.
All right, Christoph has just very quickly answered. Thank you very much, Christoph. It will be available by mid of October. And thank you very much again for this input. And I wish you all a lovely day. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the
Thank you all.
Lovely. Thank you.